What happened to the Liangzhu culture, an advanced society that built massive irrigation systems over 5,000 years ago? Why did the people of Matiate carve an entire underground city that could hold 70,000 people, then just abandon it completely? And the Scythians, nomadic warriors feared by the ancient world, why did their civilization vanish, leaving behind only gold-covered tombs? Why were these civilizations completely erased from history? So around 5,000 years ago, there was this advanced society in what's now eastern China called the Liangzhu Culture. They were doing some pretty impressive stuff for their time, building sophisticated water management systems, crafting jade artifacts that showed off their advanced craftsmanship, and their whole civilization ran pretty smoothly. Their irrigation systems were so advanced that some researchers compare them to later Chinese dynasties that came thousands of years later. Pretty amazing, but then out of nowhere, they just vanished. The whole thing collapsed, and for a long time, no one really knew why. But more recently, researchers found evidence that massive floods may have been the culprit here. Sediment layers seem to show that there was this sudden catastrophic event, like a huge monsoon or a massive dam failure that submerged their entire city. Since their writing system, if they even had one, didn't survive, we don't have any records from them explaining what actually happened. All that's left are the ruins and their mysterious jade artifacts, but some historians think they may have been one of the first examples of a lost society with advanced technology, using sophisticated water management methods that were eventually lost over time. This next place was just recently discovered in 2022, hidden away in China's Yunnan province. The Niuluchong Settlement was once home to the Dian culture, a society that existed about 2,000 years ago. They left behind all these elaborate burial sites filled with these highly detailed bronze artifacts. They had a lot of wealth, and it shows. Again though, at some point they just vanished. There's no records of a war, no evidence of a massive disaster, they just faded away. But archaeologists have found skeletons buried in ways that seem to show something sudden happened. But what? Was it a deadly disease, a violent conflict, a shift in the climate? Well, no one really knows. What we do know is that the Dian were skilled metal workers, famous for the beautifully crafted ornaments that you're looking at now, and their bronze drums, which would have probably been used in ceremonies. They were obviously very talented, but without written records, we can only guess what happened to them. Some believe a sudden pandemic wiped them out, but another theory is that they were just absorbed into the expanding Han Dynasty, and their culture simply faded away into history. Turkey is famous for its underground cities, but Matiate is a whole different level. It was discovered in 2020 beneath the modern town of Matiate, completely by accident during construction work. It's a hidden city estimated to be about 2,000 years old, and we're not talking about just a few rooms here. This place may have housed up to 70,000 people. It had houses, worship areas, storage rooms, and all the essentials for a fully functioning underground society. It's now considered to be the largest known underground city in the world. The question is, why was it built in the first place? Well, some historians think it was used as a hideout for early Christians escaping Roman persecution. Others believe it was more of a long-term settlement with people living underground for much longer periods of time. And given its size, that's very possible. Either way, it was eventually abandoned, sealed off, and forgotten. Was it abandoned because of some rampant disease? Were people just forced to move somewhere else after an invasion or a lack of resources? No one really knows. The Scythians were the ultimate warrior nomads of the ancient world. From around 900 BCE to 200 CE, they ruled the Eurasian steppes, stretching from what's now Ukraine to Mongolia. They were fierce warriors, famous for their horseback archery, and even the Greeks and Persians didn't want to mess with them. They had gold-covered tombs, elaborate tattoos, and a culture that was this mix of brutality and artistry. Of course, seeing as they were nomads, they never built permanent cities, which makes it much harder for archaeologists and historians to get a real sense of what their society looked like. Over time, other groups like the Sarmatians and the Huns absorbed them, and the Scythians just faded out. Their burial mounds, or kurgans, are all that's left, filled with gold, weapons, and skeletons. If the Scythians ever had written records, they didn't survive, so most of what we know about them comes from their enemies, mainly the Greeks and Persians, who again were terrified of them. Some believe that the remnants of the Scythians continued to exist for centuries, blending into other cultures. DNA studies do show that some modern people in Russia and Central Asia still carry Scythian genes. The Harappans, or the Indus Valley Civilization, were way ahead of their time. Existing from around 3300 to 1300 BCE in what is now Pakistan and India, they built massive cities with grid-like layouts, indoor plumbing, and drainage systems, things that even some modern cities still struggle with. They traded with Mesopotamia, had a unique writing system that no one's fully deciphered yet, mind you, and they seemed to be pretty peaceful. There's almost no evidence of warfare or weapons in their ruins, but they aren't around anymore. One theory is that climate change dried up their rivers. Archaeologists have also found some mysterious skeletons in what would have been their streets, which could be evidence of a disease or some catastrophic event that wiped them out. Then there's also the chance that they were gradually absorbed into other cultures, blending into the societies that came after them. But without having figured out their writing system, we just don't know the full story. The Maya are known for their massive cities, but Valeriana, almost nobody talks about it, and that's mainly because it was just discovered in 2024. Hidden in the Yucatan jungle, this was a full-on city filled with pyramids and plazas and ball courts, but it never made it into Spanish records, meaning it was probably abandoned before the conquistadors showed up. Like many other Maya cities, Valeriana was likely a victim of the civilization's mysterious decline. Deforestation, warfare, and droughts are some of the top theories for why the Maya abandoned so many of their cities, and Valeriana is no exception. The jungle is taken over, swallowing the ruins, and for centuries, nobody knew this place was there. It's still being excavated too, so who knows what else could be buried beneath the trees. At one time, St. Thomas, Nevada was a Mormon settlement founded in 1865. It eventually grew into a small but busy town with farms, schools, and a general store, but when the US government decided to build the Hoover Dam, the rising waters of the newly formed Lake Mead swallowed the town, and the people were of course forced to leave as their homes disappeared under water, and for decades St. Thomas stayed submerged. It wasn't until the 2000s, as Lake Mead's water levels dropped, that the ruins of the town re-emerged, and what's left of St. Thomas is now part of the Lake Mead National Recreation Area. You can see the remnants of homes, roads, and an old schoolhouse. At one time, Kish was one of the most powerful cities in ancient Sumer, dating back to around 3100 BCE. It was the first city to rise after a great flood, according to Sumerian king lists, which are lists of kings who supposedly ruled ancient Mesopotamia. They were written on clay tablets with different versions discovered over the years, but anyway, Kish had towering ziggurats, which were these massive pyramid-like temples. They also had advanced irrigation systems and a booming trade network, but despite all that, Kish eventually fell off the map. And what happened? Well, like a lot of ancient cities, it probably got hit with a combination of things. Environmental changes, trade routes may have changed, and the place just became obsolete. Maybe they were invaded. Whatever the case, by the time Babylon took over, Kish was a pile of ruins. Unlike Ur or Uruk, which still get plenty of attention, Kish just faded into obscurity. Its ruins are still out there in modern Iraq, but because of some political problems, they haven't been explored as much as other ancient sites. But for a city that once ruled over Sumer, it's kind of crazy how few people even know it existed. Poverty Point, found in modern-day Louisiana, was a massive prehistoric settlement built around 1700 BCE. It had complex earthworks, including mounds and ridges arranged in giant semicircles. This was a major center of trade, with artifacts found from as far as the Great Lakes and the Appalachian Mountains. But Poverty Point was abandoned, and no one really knows why. There's no evidence of warfare, natural disaster, or disease wiping out the people who built it. Some archaeologists believe changes in the climate made the area less livable, forcing everyone to migrate. But the site is still one of the most puzzling archaeological finds in North America, as the people who built it left no written records. Great Zimbabwe was a powerful city-state that existed between the 11th and 15th 9th centuries in what is now Zimbabwe. It was the center of a huge trade network that connected Africa to the Middle East and Asia, dealing in gold, ivory, and other valuable goods. And probably the most famous part of the city is its massive stone walls, built without mortar, standing over 30 feet high in some places. But why was Great Zimbabwe abandoned by the 16th century? There's still a lot of debate on this. Some say it was overpopulation and a lack of resources to keep up with it. Others think political chaos had something to do with it. Now, of course, European explorers who rediscovered the ruins in the 19th century just refused to believe that an African civilization could have built such an advanced city, which led to decades of misinformation and an outright suppression of the history here. Thankfully today, though, Great Zimbabwe is recognized as a major historical site, but even so, we still don't know its full story. With all that said, I've been your host James, and I will catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.